Today I will offer you additional information and questions for your consideration and discussion. Last week, Dr. Raby gave a wonderful overview of the division that happened between the 12 tribes of Israel because of their unwillingness to listen to God's promises, worship and hold fast to the covenant that God made with their ancestors, and their stubbornness in refusing to worship the God of Yahweh as opposed to worshiping other gods. This week, Randy Frazie's video introduces us to the 4 prophets that continue to share God's desires and message for the people of Israel, the northern kingdom, that is made up of 10 tribes. And we are introduced to the 4 prophets who minister to these tribes: Elijah, Elisha, Amos, and Hosea. The timeline for our discussion today spans 218 years. King Jeroboam I began his reign in 930 BC. Elijah is called as God's prophet in 875 and overlaps King Ahab's reign from 874 to 853. Now, Ahab is a wicked king and has a beautiful wife named Jezebel who encourages the worship of Baal. Elisha follows Elijah as prophet from 848 to 797. Amos is the prophet then for 10 years from 760 to 750, followed by Hosea from 750 to 715. The northern kingdom is conquered in 722, and the kingdom of Israel is exiled to Assyria, never to rise again. So let's focus first on Elijah's ministry during the reign of King Ahab. If we were raised in a Jewish family, we would readily know Elijah and celebrate him as a primary spokesperson for God. Each Passover, a special cup of wine is filled and put on the Seder table. During the Seder, the door of the house is opened and everyone stands to allow Elijah the prophet to enter and to drink. There's even a special chair that is kept for him throughout the entire Shabbat meal every Friday night. At every bris, a chair is also set aside for Elijah. At the conclusion of Shabbat, Jews also sing about Elijah, hoping he will come speedily in our days along with the Messiah, son of David, to redeem us. Elijah is a heroic figure in Jewish tradition. It is he who stands up against King Ahab, whose Phoenician wife has introduced the worship of the idol Baal to the Jewish kingdom. Elijah curses Ahab, "As the Lord lives, the God of Israel who I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding." This comes from 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. Afterwards, God tells the prophet to hide from the king in a brook known as Wadi Cherith. Meanwhile, as Elijah warned, the country suffers from a serious drought. After trying to track Elijah down for 3 years, Ahab's top aide, Obadiah, finally finds the prophet. Knowing that Elijah's curse of the drought has been fulfilled, Obadiah is hesitant to turn him in to King Ahab, but he's also afraid of what the king will do to him if he doesn't do it. Elijah makes the decision easy for Obadiah by promising to go before Ahab that very day. He agrees not out of fear of the king, but because God has commanded him, "Go, appear before Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." When Elijah meets Ahab, he tells Ahab that he has abandoned the Lord's commands and has followed the Baal's prophets. He tells Ahab to have 450 Baal prophets and 400 prophets of Asherah to assemble on Mount Carmel. Elijah challenges the priests to a contest to which God will hear the voice of the prophet and bring fire upon a sacrifice of a bull. Elijah says, you can call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord God of Israel. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Our sermon this Sunday recounts the contest. You may now pause the video to discuss the following questions. First, what is the most striking thing about Elijah that you notice? Second, why was Ahab willing to risk a confrontation at Mount Carmel? Third, what were the people thinking when no response came from their gods? Fourth, what was the Lord trying to say to the people in sending the fire? When the people shouted, "The Lord, He is our God," what were they meaning? When you confront differing viewpoints about God, what do you do? What do you wish God would bring to you in your life today? And what one thing convinces you that God is more powerful than anything else in your life? Elijah then tells the people to kill the priests, and they obey. Despite his victory, Elijah sees no change in the kingdom and has to flee to the desert to escape the wrath of Jezebel. Then God comes to Elijah again and reassures him that he is not alone, that others have resisted the temptation to worship idols. Elijah is told to go to the mountain of Horeb, where he witnesses a series of examples of God's power: an earthquake, a powerful wind, and fire, before being instructed by God to return to the city. Now you can read about another incident where Elijah stands up to King Ahab and Jezebel over a nefarious plot to convict the owner of a vineyard of blasphemy and treason, and has him stoned to death so that King Ahab can take the vineyard as his own property. Given his career as a prophet, it should not be surprising to us that it should end in a very miraculous way. When Elijah returned from his sojourn in the desert, he ran across a young man plowing a field whose name was Elisha. He took Elisha under his wing to be his successor. Now, we know next to nothing about Elisha's early life until sometime around the year 856 BC, when he was probably in his early 20s. Elisha appears to have come from a wealthy land-owning family, if the number of oxen that they had for plowing the fields is anything to go by. When the prophet Elijah arrives suddenly, Elisha's response to his call was immediate. Elijah made it clear that it was up to Elisha whether or not he responded to God's call. When Elisha asked permission to say farewell to his parents, to demonstrate his determination to follow Elijah, Elisha dramatically severs the links to his past by slaughtering the pair of oxen he was plowing with and cooking their meat over the wood of his plow and giving it to his friends and relatives in a goodbye celebration. Scripture tells us that Elisha then left and became Elijah's attendant or servant, in a similar way perhaps to that in which Joshua had served Moses. Now, we hear nothing more of Elisha for at least the next 4 years, but we can assume that he faithfully served Elijah during that period and learned from him. Knowing that the Lord was about to take him, Elijah tested his servant's devotion by 3 times asking him to remain, while Elijah went on to first to Bethel, then to Jericho, and then over the Jordan River. Elisha and the other prophets of the Lord were well aware of what was about to happen, and Elisha refused to leave his master Elijah. One day, Elisha becomes aware that Elijah's time on earth is nearly over. They're walking together, and when they reach the Jordan River, Elijah strikes the water with his cloak, and the river parts to allow them to cross over on dry land. When they reach the far side of the Jordan, Elijah asked Elisha what it is that he wants, and Elisha replies, "A double portion of your spirit," indicating that he wished to succeed Elijah in his prophetic office. Given the number of miracles that Elisha performs during his lifetime, it is possible that he's also asking for even a greater ministry than Elijah himself had had. Elijah replies that this is a very difficult request. "If you see me as I'm being taken from you, this request will be granted to you. If not, it will not be granted." Then a fiery chariot drawn by fiery horses come out of the sky and take Elijah away to the heavens. Elisha bends down, picks up the cloak that Elijah dropped, and strikes it against the river, causing the waters once again to separate. Seeing this, Elijah's followers proclaim, "Elijah's spirit now rests on Elisha." There are members of the prophetic community met him, and despite their objections, they insist on conducting a search for Elijah, even though Elisha knows that Elijah went in a fiery chariot. You may now pause the video for the following discussion of these questions. Why does Elijah continue to ask Elisha to stay behind when he goes to visit other places? Why does Elisha keep refusing to stay behind? What does this say about each man and the relationship that they have with each other? Now, why use a cloak instead of a bridge or a boat to get across the river? To what authority does this action tie both of these prophets? What does Elisha mean when he asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit? Is this a presumptuous request? Why does Elijah tell Elisha that it is a difficult thing to request? Now consider 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. What does Elisha mean in verse 12? How does he feel? Has he passed Elijah's test or been granted this request? Have you ever had a mantle of leadership passed on to you? What was it like? Could you truly be yourself? And in what company outside of immediate family and friends would you like to spend a day walking and talking with someone? What would you hope to learn? Would a miracle-working cloak be helpful to you? Why or why not? And is there now a modern version of Elijah's cloak that you would like to possess? Finally, in what manner would you like to die or pass from the scene? Is a believer's death like Elijah's? If so, how? Elisha proved to be of a different character to his former master. Where Elijah had been a solitary figure, spending much of his time alone without even a servant with him, Elisha was often found in the company of the sons of the prophets, and even with the elders of Samaria. Elisha spent some of his time with the kings of Israel, and on one occasion actually was with the king of Judah. While it was seldom appropriate for Elijah to spend time in the presence of Ahab while he allowed the worship of Baal, Ahab's son Joram put aside Canaanite deities and worshiped the golden calves that Jeroboam had set up. Though he was far from perfect and at times threatened the prophet's life, at other times Joram did honor the prophet and referred to him deferentially as my father. In common with Elijah, Elisha's ministry took him far and wide, but we know he had his own house in Samaria and the use of an upper room in the town of Shunem, when he was in that region, an arrangement that went on for much longer than Elijah's arrangement with the widow of Zaphareth. The overall impression we get is of a man who prepared to be involved in society and everyday details of life. Elisha was even willing to lend his aid in recovering a lost axe head for one of his students. But like his master, he would not suffer any insult about his office to go unpunished. Two external factors dominated the early years of Elisha's ministry: famine and war. We know that both of these were signs of God's covenantal curses being carried out on the stubborn and disobedient nation of the northern kingdom. Such curses affect both the guilty and the innocent, and in many ways, Elisha's activities lifted the burden from those who had been faithful to the Lord. Elisha's ministry played a pivotal role in the history of the northern kingdom. During his lifetime, Jezebel and the threat of Baalism that his master had struggled against was finally dealt with. In 2 Kings 9, chapter 9, verse 30 through 10, verse 30, although the people did not abandon the worship of the golden calves. It was Elisha who carried out Elijah's command and anointed Hazael king of Aram. On his deathbed, Elisha prophesied that Jehoash of Israel would defeat Aram only 3 more times in battle. Despite a reversal in their fortunes during the reign of Jeroboam II, the Syrians would continue to reduce the size of Israel's territory. In so doing, they were carrying out the first installment of the Lord's judgment on Israel until both nations were swept away by the rising tide of the Assyrian Empire. And this concludes our chapter 15 in the story.